November 2, 1943, off Empress Augusta Bay, Bougainville, Rear Admiral Aaron Stanton Merrill, 53, from Brooklyn, stood on USS Montpelier's bridge watching his radar screen paint targets that shouldn't exist. The green phosphorescent blips multiplied, 4 destroyers, then cruisers behind them. Merrill's throat tightened. Japanese surface forces hadn't challenged an American landing operation in 6 months. Tonight, they'd come in strength to destroy the Marine beachhead 20 miles behind him. What Merrill didn't know, the next 87 minutes would prove a technology most admirals dismissed could demolish an entire cruiser squadron before optical rangefinders even acquired targets. His task force counted 4 light cruisers and 8 destroyers against Vice Admiral Sentaro Omori's force of 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 6 destroyers. The Japanese ships displaced more tonnage. Their long-lance torpedoes outranged anything Merrill carried. Their crews had trained for night surface combat since 1920. Could American radar truly compensate for those advantages? Commander Ralph Willett, 39, Montpelier's gunnery officer, studied the Mark 8 fire control radar display. The system had arrived 6 weeks earlier with installation teams who spoke in frequencies and wavelengths, while veteran gunners muttered about proving ranges through optical instruments. Willett had spent those weeks translating electronic bearings into firing solutions, running drills until his gun crews could execute radar-directed fire without seeing their targets. The Mark 8 painted enemy positions with clarity that made traditional spotting obsolete. Range, bearing, speed all appeared as numeric readouts beside those green blips. No searchlights needed, no star shells revealing your position, just cold electronic precision tracking targets through darkness and rain. At Aero 127 hours, Merrill's radar detected the Japanese formation 20 miles northwest. Omori's ships approached at 30 knots, clearly intending to sweep past Merrill's formation and bombard the Marine beachhead. The numbers seemed impossible. 4 American light cruisers, each displacing 10,000 tons with 6-inch guns, preparing to engage Japanese heavy cruisers mounting 8-inch batteries. But Merrill's radar gave him something Omori lacked, complete situational awareness in total darkness. The American formation steamed in column, Montpelier leading, followed by Cleveland, Columbia, and Denver. Destroyers screened ahead and on both flanks. Every ship's fire control system networked through radar data, creating a unified picture of the tactical situation. Omori's ships, despite their individual superiority, operated blind beyond optical range. Lieutenant Commander Bruce McCandless, 30, aboard destroyer Spence, monitored his own radar screen. The Japanese formation had split. Destroyers accelerating ahead, the classic torpedo attack formation that had devastated Allied forces at Savo Island 14 months earlier. McCandless reported the formation change. Merrill adjusted his column's heading to maintain radar tracking while presenting minimal target profile for torpedo runs. What traditional doctrine couldn't anticipate, radar transformed naval combat from mutual groping in darkness to something resembling target practice. The side that saw first, ranged first, fired first, would control the engagement completely. Merrill ordered his destroyers to engage the approaching Japanese destroyers, while his cruisers would concentrate on the enemy heavy cruisers. At Aero 146 hours, Montpelier's Mark 8 radar locked onto heavy cruiser Sendai at 18,000 yards. Optical rangefinders showed nothing but darkness. Radar showed precise bearing, range, and target speed. Willett fed the data into his fire control computer. At Aero 150 hours, Montpelier's 6-inch guns erupted. Shells arced through rain and darkness toward a target no American eye could see. Willett watched his radar screen. The blip representing Sendai continued steady. His first salvo fell short. He adjusted elevation using radar-derived corrections. Second salvo fired. The Japanese had no idea they were under fire until shells detonated around them. Sendai's crew scrambled to battle stations, searching darkness for muzzle flashes that radar-directed firing didn't produce. American guns fired from positions optical spotting couldn't locate, guided by a technology Japanese doctrine hadn't countered. By 01:53 hours, every American cruiser had acquired radar locks. Cleveland engaged heavy cruiser Myoko. Columbia targeted light cruiser Agano. Denver held fire, tracking targets as reserve. The American firing solutions updated continuously as Mark 8 radar tracked target movements through evasive maneuvers that would have broken optical tracking immediately. Omori's force detected muzzle flashes and opened fire, but at estimated positions based on flash observation, not actual American locations. Japanese shells landed 500 to 1,000 yards off target. Their optical rangefinders couldn't acquire targets through darkness and rain. Their fire control depended on visual spotting of shell splashes. Impossible when you couldn't see your target or your own impacts. The tactical imbalance emerged brutally clear. American ships fired radar-directed salvos every 20 seconds with corrections based on electronic tracking. Japanese ships fired sporadically, adjusting blindly, hoping to stumble into effective range. It wasn't combat. It resembled execution. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger, 42, aboard destroyer Charles Osborne, led his division against the Japanese destroyer screen. His Mark 8 surface search radar painted 4 destroyers charging toward the American cruiser column at 35 knots. Traditional doctrine called for visual identification before firing. Moosbrugger had newer orders: engage on radar contact. At 01:56 hours, Osborne's 5-inch guns opened fire at 12,000 yards. The Japanese destroyers, accustomed to launching torpedo attacks before gun engagement, found themselves under accurate fire 6,000 yards beyond their doctrine's expected range. Destroyer Hatsukaze took 3 hits before her crew even spotted the American formation. The Japanese launched torpedoes anyway, 46 long lance weapons, fanning through darkness toward estimated American positions. The weapons ran fast, carried massive warheads, and had sunk cruisers at Savo Island and Cape Esperance. But those victories came from point-blank surprise attacks. Tonight, Merrill's radar had tracked the Japanese approach from 20 miles out. His formation had maneuvered to minimize torpedo threat angles. When the long lances arrived, they found only empty ocean where American ships had been 3 minutes earlier. By 02:01 hours, Sendai was burning. Cleveland's 6-inch shells had penetrated her thin armor at 16,000 yards, a range where optical fire control would still be establishing target range. The Japanese heavy cruiser tried to reply, but her optical directors couldn't locate targets through smoke and darkness. Her rangefinders showed only empty ocean. Her radar, primitive early warning type, useless for fire control, gave bearing but not firing solution. Would Omori's heavier guns and superior torpedoes overcome American radar advantage? The answer materialized in flames spreading across Sendai's superstructure as Montpelier's next salvo struck her forward turret. Commander Tamechi Hara, 41, commanded destroyer Shigure in Omori's screen. His diary would later record, "We fired at muzzle flashes but hit nothing. They fired from darkness and hit everything. We had become targets, not combatants." The problem, Japanese naval doctrine, built on superior night fighting training, couldn't counter opponents who saw through darkness itself. At 02:05 hours, Myoko took her first hits. Cleveland's radar had tracked the heavy cruiser through a radical turn meant to unmask her torpedo tubes. The American fire control computer predicted the turn's completion point and directed shells there. Myoko emerged from her turn into a curtain of 6-inch fire. 8 shells struck her superstructure and forward turret in 40 seconds. The Japanese heavy cruiser's 8-inch guns had superior range and hitting power, advantages rendered meaningless when you couldn't see your target to shoot it. Myoko's gunnery officer resorted to firing star shells, hoping to illuminate American ships. The flares revealed only empty ocean. Merrill's formation had changed course again, guided by radar tracking of Japanese movements. Destroyer Foote, screening Denver's port quarter, took a torpedo hit at 0207 hours. The Long Lance weapon, launched 10 minutes earlier on estimated bearing, finally found a target by chance rather than aim. The explosion severed Foote's bow, but one torpedo hit from 46 launched demonstrated how thoroughly radar had inverted the tactical equation. By 0210 hours, Sendai was dead in the water, burning from bridge to stern. Her crew abandoned ship. She would sink within 20 minutes. Omori's flagship, heavy cruiser Maya, still hadn't fired an effective salvo. Her optical rangefinders couldn't acquire targets. Her crew watched muzzle flashes appear, fire, and vanish before bearing could be determined. That single technological advantage multiplied. Within the next hour, 3 Japanese heavy cruisers would become floating wrecks. The entire Solomon Islands naval balance would shift permanently. The battle off Empress Augusta Bay demonstrated what many senior officers had dismissed as theoretical. Radar-directed fire could eliminate visual range as the limiting factor in naval combat. Ships equipped with Mark 8 fire control radar could engage and destroy opponents before those opponents even acquired targets. The implications terrified Japanese commanders who'd built their entire doctrine on superior night fighting skills. Merrill's formation continued engaging. Every American cruiser maintained radar lock on assigned targets while maneuvering to avoid torpedo spreads the Mark 8 tracked as easily as it tracked ships. The Japanese force, despite individual ship superiority, fought blind. Their crews saw muzzle flashes, heard shells landing, watched sister ships burning, but couldn't locate attackers to shoot back. At 02:15 hours, Agano took 6 hits in rapid succession. Columbia's fire control radar had tracked the light cruiser through 3 course changes, updated firing solutions automatically, and directed shells to intercept points. Agano's crew never saw their attacker. They died fighting ghosts that radar made real. Rear Admiral Frederick Firth, 48, had delivered Mark 8 specifications to Bureau of Ordnance in March 1941 with a simple argument. Whichever Navy could shoot through darkness would control the Pacific night. His colleagues called it engineer's fantasy. Visual rangefinding had governed naval combat for centuries. 2 years later, off Bougainville, Firth's fantasy was killing cruisers. The Mark 8 fire control radar emerged from Bell Telephone Laboratories' investigation into microwave transmission in 1940. Dr. William Shockley's team, experimenting with 10-centimeter wavelength transmissions, discovered their signal could detect metal objects at 30,000 yards and measure range within 20 yards accuracy. Could a radar system track ships precisely enough to direct naval gunfire? The concept violated traditional gunnery doctrine. Optical rangefinders had evolved over 50 years into precision instruments. Gun crews trained for years to spot shell splashes and adjust fire. Fire control computers incorporated human observation into complex mechanical calculations. Replacing human eyes with electronic signals seemed absurd to officers who'd spent careers mastering visual spotting. Commander Howard Thompson, 44, headed the Naval Research Laboratory's Radar Development Section. His challenge wasn't building a system that could detect ships. Early warning radar already accomplished that. His challenge was creating a system precise enough for fire control while compact enough for cruiser installation and simple enough for combat operation. Thompson's team solved precision through frequency modulation. The Mark 8 transmitted pulses at 3,000 megacycles, high frequency that allowed tight beam focus and accurate range measurement. The system measured time between transmission and echo return, calculating range automatically. Angular measurement came from antenna rotation. The direction the antenna pointed when echo strength peaked determined bearing. Traditional optical rangefinders required two separate instruments measuring target parallax. The Mark 8 needed only one antenna. Traditional methods broke down beyond 20,000 yards in darkness. The Mark 8 maintained accuracy to 35,000 yards, regardless of visibility. Traditional spotting took minutes to establish range. The Mark 8 gave instant readout. What commanders hadn't anticipated, radar transformed gunnery from artistic skill to engineering problem. Feed accurate range and bearing into the fire control computer, and the computer generated perfect firing solutions. Human spotters became obsolete. Shell splash observation became unnecessary. The entire elaborate system of visual gunnery collapsed before technology that simply measured distance electronically. Captain Cornelius Flynn, 52, commanded Cleveland during installation of her Mark 8 system in July 1943. His gunnery officer, Commander James Price, 38, resisted the change. Price had trained his spotters for 3 years. They could estimate range within 200 yards by eye. They could identify ship types at 15,000 yards. Now engineers wanted them to trust green blips on a screen? Flynn ordered live fire trials against target sleds. Price's optical spotters needed 6 salvos to straddle the target at 18,000 yards. The Mark 8 straddled on the second salvo. At 25,000 yards, optical spotting couldn't acquire the target. The Mark 8 maintained lock and delivered hits on salvo 4. Price stopped objecting. His spotters began training on radar interpretation. The system's limitations emerged during trials. Weather degraded signal quality. Rain and heavy seas scattered the microwave beam, reducing effective range. Targets below 5,000 yards were too close for radar lock. At knife fighting range, optical fire control remained superior. Multiple targets could confuse the system if bearing separation fell below 2 degrees. But these limitations mattered little when the alternative was blindness. Commander Richard Williams, 41, Cleveland's radar officer, explained it to skeptical gun crews. Optical ranging at night gets you maybe 12,000 yards effective range in perfect conditions. The Mark 8 gets you 30,000 yards in any conditions. We're not replacing your eyes. We're giving you new ones that see farther. Integration with existing fire control computers required mechanical ingenuity. The Mark 8 generated electrical signals representing range and bearing. Fire control computers accepted mechanical input from optical instruments. Lieutenant Gerald Foster, 29, an electrical engineering graduate from MIT, designed translator boxes that converted radar's electrical outputs into mechanical movements the fire control computer could interpret. By September 1943, 6 cruisers had operational Mark 8 systems. Training emphasized speed. Radar gave advantage only if gun crews could translate electronic data into rapid fire. Traditional doctrine called for spotting salvos, observing splashes, making adjustments. Radar doctrine eliminated spotting. First salvo used radar range. Subsequent salvos adjusted based on radar tracking of target maneuvers. What this meant in practice, enemy ships came under accurate fire before they knew combat had started. The psychological impact couldn't be measured. Japanese crews trained to fight at visual range suddenly faced shells arriving from invisible opponents. Their superior night fighting skills became worthless against enemies who fought from beyond visual distance. Opposition came from surprising quarters. Rear Admiral Richmond Turner, 58, had commanded cruisers for 20 years. He'd seen new technologies fail in combat when simple mechanical systems survived. Radar seemed fragile. Vacuum tubes, delicate antennas, complex electronics. One shell hit to the radar antenna and you lost everything. Traditional optical directors were simpler, tougher, distributed around the ship. Turner argued his case to Admiral Ernest King in September 1943. We're betting our cruisers on electronics that might fail the first time someone shoots back. Optical instruments can take battle damage and keep working. This radar system goes down. We're blind. King had read intelligence reports from Guadalcanal. Japanese ships consistently achieved surprise in night actions. Their crews could spot American ships before American crews spotted them. The casualty lists spoke clearly. King approved Mark 8 installation across all new cruisers and retrofits to existing vessels when possible. Commander Arthur Davis, 43, voiced another concern during training exercises off Hawaii. His cruiser Indianapolis had received Mark 8 in August. The system worked perfectly in exercises. But combat introduced factors exercises couldn't simulate. What happened when Japanese ships used radar jammers? What if they fired star shells that illuminated the area, confusing the radar returns? What if they closed to point-blank range where radar couldn't lock? Davis's concerns proved prescient but overstated. Japanese radar development had focused on early warning, not jamming. Their star shells did create false returns, but Mark 8 operators learned to ignore range spikes that appeared suddenly and disappeared quickly. Point-blank combat remained dangerous, but radar allowed American ships to prevent enemies from closing to knife-fighting range in the first place. The system's true advantage emerged in its network effect. One ship with Mark 8 could direct fire accurately. 4 ships with Mark 8, coordinating through radio, could mass firepower against single targets while maintaining formation integrity. The Japanese could sink individual American ships. They couldn't sink formations that operated as single coordinated entities. Installation posed logistical challenges. The Mark 8 antenna weighed 4,000 pounds and required mounting above the main fire control director. Cables ran throughout the ship connecting antenna to transmitter to receiver to fire control computer. Each installation took shipyard crews 3 weeks. By October 1943, only 8 cruisers had operational systems. Demand exceeded supply by orders of magnitude. Production bottlenecks centered on klystron tubes, the high-frequency vacuum tubes that generated the 3,000 megacycle transmission. Western Electric's Kearney, New Jersey plant could produce 200 tubes monthly. Each Mark 8 system required 16 tubes plus spares. Simple math limited installation rate to 12 ships monthly, even with perfect assembly. But even limited deployment changed Pacific naval combat fundamentally. Before Mark 8, Japanese ships could approach American formations under darkness and deliver devastating torpedo attacks. After Mark 8, American formations detected approaching enemies at extreme range and maneuvered to engage from positions of advantage. The night belonged to whoever owned the radar. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill had conducted radar gunnery exercises off Purvis Bay in late October. His 4 cruisers fired 2,400 rounds at target sleds tracked only by Mark 8. Hit percentages doubled compared to optical fire control. The exercises proved the technology worked. They didn't prove how it would perform when targets shot back and maneuvered violently. The first adjustment came from necessity. During night firing drills on October 28th, Montpelier's radar operators discovered their Mark 8 lost lock when targets crossed within 8,000 yards. The antenna couldn't depress enough to track close targets while maintaining fire control accuracy. Commander Ralph Willett added doctrine: engage at maximum range, maintain distance advantage, never let enemies close to knife-fighting range where radar became handicap rather than asset. Cleveland's Mark 8 suffered intermittent failures during exercises. The system would suddenly lose all returns, display blank for 30 seconds, then resume normal operation. Commander James Price's radar technicians traced the fault to moisture condensation on waveguide connections. Salt air in the Solomon Islands created corrosion that disrupted microwave transmission. They sealed connections with protective compound and added regular maintenance checks every 4 hours during operations. Columbia's radar officer, Lieutenant Thomas Winters, 31, noticed his system showed false returns during rain squalls. The Mark 8 painted phantom targets that appeared, moved erratically, then vanished. Winters learned to distinguish weather returns from actual targets by tracking motion. Ships moved consistently, weather patterns scattered randomly. He trained his operators to ignore returns that exceeded 40-knot speed or showed irregular movement. How many crews would maintain that discipline when real targets mixed with false ones during combat? By early November, Merrill's task force had integrated radar into formation doctrine. Ships maintained visual separation of 500 yards, but coordinated fire through radar data sharing. Montpelier, as flagship, would track primary targets and assign firing priorities. Other cruisers would confirm targets on their own Mark 8 systems and engage as directed. The formation fought as single organism rather than 4 separate ships. Training revealed human limitations matched technological ones. Radar operators, mostly young enlisted men with technical aptitude, faced overwhelming information flow during simulated combat. The Mark 8 screen showed every target within 40,000 yards simultaneously. Distinguishing friendly from enemy, warship from merchant, primary target from distraction required constant decision-making under pressure. Could these operators maintain clarity when shells landed and ships burned around them? Commander Bruce McCandless, aboard destroyer Spence, adapted Mark 8 data for torpedo attack coordination. His surface search radar couldn't generate fire control solutions, but it could track multiple targets and calculate intercept courses. McCandless developed technique, position Spence between enemy formation and American cruisers, use radar to guide torpedo launches at targets illuminated by cruiser fire, then withdraw behind screening smoke. The destroyer became precision targeting platform rather than individual combatant. Opposition emerged from unexpected source. Several cruiser captains argued radar made formations too dependent on single technology. Captain Bernard Austin, 49, commanding Denver, noted that one lucky shell to Montpelier's radar antenna could blind the entire task force if doctrine depended on flagship's Mark 8 for target assignment. Austin advocated distributed engagement, each ship acquiring and firing on independent targets rather than coordinated fire. Merrill rejected distributed engagement. The Mark 8's advantage came from concentration. 4 cruisers firing at single target could destroy it quickly, then shift to next target. Spreading fire across multiple targets diluted the advantage. Merrill's doctrine emphasized network resilience. If flagship lost radar, second ship assumed coordination role immediately. Redundancy protected against single-point failure. Testing under realistic conditions proved impossible until actual combat. Exercises used cooperative targets that maneuvered predictably. Real enemies would take evasive action, lay smoke, and coordinate counterfire. The Mark 8 could track through most countermeasures, but operators needed combat experience to maintain effectiveness under stress. Would the system and its operators survive first contact with enemy reality? Maintenance became critical factor. The Mark 8 contained 200 vacuum tubes that failed randomly. Each cruiser carried 40 spares, but tube replacement required trained technicians and 20 minutes work in cramped spaces. Combat didn't allow 20-minute pauses for repairs. Radar officers instituted preventive replacement, changed tubes on fixed schedules regardless of current function. The practice reduced combat failures to acceptable levels. Weather limitations couldn't be overcome. Heavy rain reduced effective range from 35,000 yards to 20,000 yards. Dense fog degraded accuracy enough that optical fire control became competitive. The Mark 8 didn't eliminate traditional methods, it supplemented them for conditions where optical ranging failed completely. Crews needed proficiency in both systems. By late October, Merrill's task force had developed doctrine that maximized Mark 8 advantages while protecting against its limitations. Engage at extreme range before enemies detected the American formation. Coordinate fire through radar data sharing to mass firepower. Maintain range advantage to prevent close combat where radar lost effectiveness. Maneuver constantly to avoid torpedo attacks the Mark 8 detected but couldn't prevent. The doctrine assumed American forces would dictate engagement terms because radar gave them first detection. Lieutenant Commander Robert Morris, 35, Montpelier's communications officer, noted critical vulnerability. Radio coordination required constant transmission of tactical data, target bearings, ranges, course changes. Japanese direction finding could locate American ships through their radio emissions. Morris implemented protocol: radio silence until combat started, then brief encrypted bursts updated every 30 seconds. Speed of transmission became survival factor: transmit, move, transmit from new position. Integration with destroyer screens created coordination challenge. Destroyers carried surface search radar but not fire control radar. They could detect targets but not generate firing solutions accurate enough for long-range gunnery. Doctrine assigned destroyers to close-range torpedo attack while cruisers engaged at standoff distance. The Mark 8 gave destroyers another role: radar pickets that extended the task force's detection envelope 15,000 yards beyond cruiser range. Final doctrine emerged from synthesis. Destroyers detected approaching enemies at maximum range. Cruisers used Mark 8 to acquire fire control solutions before visual contact. Coordinated fire from multiple cruisers destroyed primary threats quickly. Continuous maneuvering avoided torpedo attacks. Maintained range advantage, prevented close combat. The doctrine worked perfectly in exercises. November 2nd would test whether it survived contact with skilled opponents fighting for survival. At Ord 2, 20 hours off Empress Augusta Bay, Commander Ralph Willett watched Myoko burning 16,000 yards distant. Montpelier's Mark 8 maintained lock despite the heavy cruiser's desperate evasive maneuvers. The Japanese ship zigged right, then left, then right again. Classical evasion doctrine meant to break optical tracking. Willett's radar followed every movement, updated firing solutions continuously, directed shells to intercept points. Myoko took 3 more hits before completing her third turn. The heavy cruiser's 8-inch guns fired back, but her optical rangefinders still couldn't acquire Montpelier through darkness and smoke. Japanese shells landed 800 yards short, walked across empty ocean where Montpelier had been 2 minutes earlier. Admiral Merrill had adjusted formation course again, guided by radar tracking of Japanese fire. The American cruisers fought like prize fighters: hit, move, hit again, before the opponent located you. Destroyer Hatsukaze, trailing smoke from earlier damage, attempted to close for torpedo attack. Commander Bruce McCandless, tracking her approach on Spence's surface search radar, positioned his destroyer between Hatsukaze and the American cruiser column. At Ord 224 hours, Spence's 5-inch guns opened fire at 9,000 yards. The Japanese destroyer took 6 hits in 40 seconds. Her forward magazine exploded. She capsized within 3 minutes, taking 200 crew with her. Could any torpedo attack succeed when radar detected every approach and directed fire before torpedo range? By Ord 227 hours, Vice Admiral Omori realized his tactical position had collapsed. 3 of his cruisers were burning. His destroyers had launched 46 torpedoes without scoring decisive hits. His force still hadn't sunk a single American cruiser. The technology gap his intelligence officers had dismissed as American propaganda was killing his squadron. Omori ordered general retreat. The battle was lost, but perhaps the squadron could be saved. Merrill detected the retreat immediately. His Mark 8 showed the Japanese formation breaking apart, damaged ships heading northwest at reduced speed, healthy ships covering their withdrawal. Traditional doctrine called for pursuit to complete the enemy's destruction. Merrill faced different calculation. His mission was protecting the Marine beachhead, not destroying the Japanese fleet. Pursuit would take him away from the landing zones and potentially into submarine ambush. He ordered selective pursuit. destroyers would harry the retreat, while cruisers maintained position off Empress Augusta Bay. Under attack from American destroyers, Agano attempted to create smokescreen. At 0231 hours, the light cruiser's crew activated smoke generators and began laying thick black clouds across her retreat path. The tactic had worked at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal, breaking optical tracking and allowing damaged ships to escape. Commander James Price, tracking Agano through Cleveland's Mark 8, watched the radar blip continue steady despite smoke that would have blinded optical rangefinders. Microwave radiation penetrated smoke as easily as darkness. Cleveland's 6-inch guns fired through the smokescreen and struck Agano 3 times. Destroyer Samudari, screening the Japanese retreat, fired her remaining torpedoes at pursuing American destroyers. The long lance weapons ran true at 49 knots toward targets 12,000 yards distant. But those targets tracked the torpedo launches on radar, calculated intercept times, and maneuvered clear before the weapons arrived. One torpedo passed 50 yards from destroyer Thatcher's bow. Thatcher's crew never saw it. They'd already turned to new heading based on radar tracking of torpedo wakes. How do you hit opponents who see your weapons coming before you see them? Maya, still relatively undamaged, tried to cover the retreat by engaging American cruisers from 18,000 yards. The heavy cruiser's 8-inch guns could reach that distance easily. Her fire control team plotted bearings from muzzle flashes, calculated range from shell splash timing, and directed fire at estimated American positions. 3 salvos landed 600 to 1,000 yards from their targets. The 4th salvo hit nothing but ocean. Maya's gunnery officer was shooting at ghosts, American ships that had occupied certain coordinates 3 minutes earlier but had since moved to new positions radar revealed and optical ranging couldn't detect. At 0237 hours, Montpelier's Mark 8 detected new contacts 25,000 yards northwest. 3 cruisers heading southeast at 28 knots. Reinforcements. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's force from Rabaul, arriving too late to prevent disaster but potentially able to trap Merrill's formation between 2 enemy groups. The tactical situation inverted suddenly. Merrill faced possible encirclement. The American admiral analyzed his tactical display. Kurita's fresh force outnumbered Merrill's cruisers and held position advantage. The American formation would have to fight through Kurita to retreat. But Kurita's ships lacked Mark 8 fire control radar. They would fight blind like Omori's force had. Merrill calculated odds. His cruisers could engage Kurita at extreme range, mass fire on individual targets, and potentially destroy the reinforcements before they closed to effective range. Or he could disengage, use superior speed to open range, and preserve his force. The Marine beachhead would remain vulnerable to bombardment, but his cruisers would survive. Commander Ralph Willett provided different calculation. Montpelier's magazines held 1,200 6-inch rounds remaining from a starting load of 1,800. Cleveland, Columbia, and Denver showed similar depletion. Sustained engagement against fresh opponents would exhaust ammunition before destroying Kurita's force. The Mark 8 gave advantage, but advantage didn't matter when guns went silent from empty magazines. Merrill ordered disengagement. His formation would withdraw southeast at maximum speed, using radar to track both Japanese forces and maintain safe separation. Kurita could chase, but Merrill's ships were faster. Omori could rally, but his damaged cruisers couldn't pursue. The American task force would preserve itself while keeping both Japanese forces away from the beachhead until dawn brought air support. Between 0240 and 0315 hours, Merrill's cruisers maintained 30 knots while tracking 3 separate enemy groups on radar. Omori's damaged ships limped northwest. Kurita's fresh force pursued southeast. Japanese destroyers attempted to flank the American formation from multiple bearings. The Mark 8 painted the entire tactical situation simultaneously, something impossible with optical observation alone. Merrill maneuvered his formation through gaps in the enemy disposition like a chess master exploiting board position. At 03:18 hours, destroyer Foote, damaged earlier by torpedo hit and struggling to maintain formation speed, came under attack from 3 Japanese destroyers. Commander Albert Kelly, 38, Foote's captain, assessed his tactical situation. His ship could make 15 knots maximum with her damaged bow. The Japanese destroyers approached at 28 knots from 2 bearings. His 5-inch guns lacked fire control radar, only surface search radar that gave bearing, but not firing solution. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't outfight them. Could destroyer Spence provide covering fire before the Japanese closed? Bruce McCandless brought Spence between Foote and the pursuing Japanese destroyers. His Mark 8 equipped gun systems acquired targets at 14,000 yards and opened fire immediately. The Japanese destroyers, accustomed to closing for gun and torpedo combat, found themselves under accurate fire at ranges their doctrine considered safe approach distance. Destroyer Shigure took 4 hits and withdrew. Samudare laid smoke and disengaged. The 3rd destroyer, Shiratsuyu, continued closing until Spence's 5th salvo penetrated her engineering spaces. Shiratsuyu lost power and drifted to stop. Dawn arrived at 05:35 hours, revealing the tactical situation American radar had tracked through darkness. Omori's force scattered across 40 miles, Sendai sunk, Miyoko burning and listing, Agano down by the bow with flooding forward. Japanese destroyers clustered around damaged cruisers, preparing tow attempts. Kurita's force had abandoned pursuit and withdrawn northwest. The American task force maintained position 30 miles offshore from Empress Augusta Bay, ready to intercept any renewed approach to the beachhead. Marine fighters from Tarakana Airfield arrived at 05:48 hours to provide air cover. Their pilots reported no Japanese surface forces within 50 miles of the landing zones. The Mark 8 radar had accomplished its mission, allowed inferior American forces to defeat superior Japanese forces through technological advantage, then preserve those forces through tactical flexibility impossible without complete situational awareness. But the night's combat revealed something more significant than one engagement's outcome. The Mark 8 had fundamentally altered naval combat calculations. Traditional doctrine assumed mutual blindness at night, both sides groping for contact, combat determined by training and luck. Radar eliminated blindness for the side that possessed it. The side without radar didn't fight at disadvantage. They fought already defeated, shooting blind at opponents who saw everything. Between 01:50 and 03:17 hours, Merrill's task force had fired 4,173 6-inch shells and 638 5-inch rounds. Japanese forces fired estimated 3,200 8-inch shells, 1,800 6-inch rounds, and 46 torpedoes. American hit percentage reached 11.3%, triple the rate achieved with optical fire control in previous night actions. Japanese hit percentage fell below 2%. 1 torpedo hit from 46 launched demonstrated how thoroughly radar had inverted combat advantage. During the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, radar-directed fire destroyed 1 Japanese heavy cruiser, crippled 2 others, and sank 4 destroyers in 87 minutes of combat. This represented the first naval engagement where radar fire control completely dominated traditional optical gunnery. American forces suffered 1 destroyer damaged. The exchange ratio, 7 Japanese ships sunk or crippled versus 1 American ship damaged, demonstrated technology's capacity to overcome numerical and positional disadvantage. The numbers seemed impossible: 4 light cruisers defeating 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 6 destroyers. But Mark 8 fire control radar gave those light cruisers effective range advantage that made their smaller guns more lethal than the enemy's larger weapons. Japanese 8-inch guns could reach 30,000 yards, theoretically, but optical fire control limited practical range to 12,000 yards at night. American 6-inch guns reached only 25,000 yards, but radar fire control delivered hits at 18,000 yards consistently. The tactical chain reaction proved decisive. Early radar detection allowed Merrill to position his formation advantageously before combat started. Radar fire control allowed his cruisers to engage at extreme range before Japanese forces acquired targets. Continuous radar tracking allowed constant maneuvering that avoided torpedo attacks while maintaining fire. The technological advantage multiplied through each tactical cycle until Japanese forces faced destruction or retreat as only options. Strategic implications spread through Pacific naval operations within weeks. Japanese doctrine had emphasized night combat superiority since the 1920s. Their crews trained extensively for darkness engagement. Their equipment, especially long, lance torpedoes, gave them documented advantages. Empress Augusta Bay demonstrated that radar made those advantages irrelevant. A technological leap invalidated 30 years of tactical development. The Mark VIII's network effect transformed American naval formations. Individual ships with radar fire control could engage effectively. Formations where every ship had radar could coordinate fire, mass firepower on priority targets, and maneuver as unified organism. Japanese forces couldn't counter formations that operated with perfect mutual awareness while maintaining complete concealment. Vice Admiral William Halsey, commanding South Pacific Forces, requested immediate Mark VIII installation across all cruisers and large destroyers in his area. His report to Pacific Fleet Headquarters noted, "Radar fire control changes surface combat fundamentally. Opposition without comparable equipment cannot compete. Prioritize installation above all other modifications." Production constraints limited immediate deployment. Western Electric's Kearney plant expanded operations to 300 Klystron tubes monthly by December 1943. Each Mark VIII system still required 3 weeks installation. The Navy prioritized new construction. Every cruiser and large destroyer launched after December 1943 included Mark VIII as standard equipment. Retrofit installations for existing vessels proceeded as shipyard availability allowed. Japanese naval intelligence analyzed captured equipment and combat records from Empress Augusta Bay. Their assessment, forwarded to Combined Fleet Headquarters in late November, concluded, "American radar fire control grants $8,000 to 12,000 yard range advantage in night combat. Our forces cannot close to effective torpedo range before suffering crippling damage. Night surface actions against radar-equipped formations should be avoided." The assessment reached fleet commanders too late. On November 25, 1943, 5 Japanese cruisers attempted to intercept American forces off Cape St. George. American destroyers, equipped with Mark VIII systems, detected the Japanese formation at 22,000 yards and maneuvered into attack position undetected. The resulting engagement lasted 43 minutes. 3 Japanese cruisers sank. No American ships suffered damage. Post-war technology development accelerated based on Mark VIII's demonstrated effectiveness. Western Electric received contracts for Mark XIII fire control radar in February 1944, improved version with 50,000 yard range and ability to track targets through chaff clouds. General Electric developed Mark 25 by mid-1944, incorporating frequency agile transmission that defeated early jamming attempts. By 1945, every American cruiser, battleship, and fleet destroyer carried multiple fire control radar systems. Doctrine evolved to exploit radar's capabilities fully. Surface action instructions published in March 1944 emphasized radar-directed engagement at extreme range, continuous formation maneuvering, and coordinated fire concentration. The instructions noted, visual contact is no longer prerequisite for effective engagement. Fire control radar allows destruction of enemy forces before they achieve visual acquisition. Could Japanese forces have countered radar fire control if they'd recognized its significance earlier? Technical analysis suggests limited options. Japan's electronics industry lacked capacity for mass production of microwave components. Their radar development focused on early warning rather than fire control. Even recognizing the threat, they couldn't have fielded comparable equipment before 1946 at earliest. The strategic shift extended beyond tactical engagements. Japanese naval planning after Empress Augusta Bay avoided night surface actions unless absolutely necessary. Their doctrine shifted to submarine attacks and kamikaze strikes, methods that didn't require surface ship supremacy. The night, once Japan's tactical domain, became territory they conceded to American technological advantage. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill received Navy Cross for the engagement. His after-action report emphasized the Mark VIII's decisive role. This victory resulted from superior equipment rather than superior seamanship. Our crews performed well, but the Mark VIII fire control radar provided advantage the enemy couldn't overcome. Commander Ralph Willett continued developing radar gunnery techniques through 1944, eventually commanding his own cruiser. He survived the war and later served as Director of Naval Electronics Research. His technical papers on radar fire control influenced post-war naval development significantly. Vice Admiral Sentaro Omori faced court-martial for losing his cruiser squadron. The inquiry determined radar fire control, not tactical errors, caused his defeat. Omori returned to fleet duty, but never commanded surface forces again. He died in 1945 during American bombing of Kure Naval Base. Destroyer Foote received repairs at Espiritu Santo and returned to service by January 1944. Her crew received unit commendation. The ship survived the war and served until 1947 before being sold for scrap. The Mark VIII system underwent continuous refinement. By war's end, versions equipped 165 American warships. Hit percentages in night combat increased from 2–3% with optical fire control to 12–15% with radar direction. The technology helped establish American naval dominance that persisted through the war's final years. November 2, 1943 marked the last Japanese attempt to defeat American cruiser forces in night surface combat. The 87 minutes off Empress Augusta Bay demonstrated that superior training and tactics couldn't overcome technological advantage. The side that saw through darkness controlled the night completely.